is a scorcher. But look at that blue. Everything's high definition today. 1, 2, hit it.
In my presentation today, we are going to talk about Picasso's Blue Period, which spanned from 1901 to 1904. At 20 years old, Picasso was an artist in a state of turmoil and depression. He was living in poverty where he would often burn his own artwork to stay warm. He was also mourning the suicide of his close friend and drifting between the up-and-coming social circles of Barcelona and the dark and unconventional district of Paris. During the Blue Period, Picasso turned his back to the vibrant naturalistic palettes. Instead, he immersed his paintings in a monochromatic world of blues, greens, and grays. He was no longer painting for the sake of beauty in the traditional sense. He was documenting the urban underclass, the beggars, and the outcasts who existed on the borders of a rapidly developing Europe. This brings us to the core of my research. How did Picasso use a monochromatic blue palette and elongated figures to trigger empathy for the underclass of the early 20th century in the European society? I argue that these stylistic choices were intentional tools and that transformed the poor from mere subjects into symbols of deep, universal human worth. Picasso's famous painting, The Old Guitarist, which was painted in 1903, is the perfect example. It isn't just a portrait of a man in hardship. It is a visual story of what the Blue Period stands for. The monotone blue palette consumes the figure by creating a cold, flat tone. In the process, Picasso removes the guitarist from a specific time or place. He's no longer just a hobo on the street corner in 1903. He becomes a timeless representative of human sorrow. Within this painting, he also brings light to something completely different. That even if you are stripped of everything, art and music remain a source of light and spiritual survival. With the guitar being the only warmth within the entire composition, this creates a powerful focal point for the observer. Fun fact, because he was so poor, he often painted over old canvases. If you looked closely enough at the painting, you can see the faint outline of a woman's face from a previous piece of work. Yes, color is what normally brings your eye to a specific item, painting, or part of a painting, but the color is only half the story. To generally get a reaction of empathy, Picasso was greatly influenced by the Spanish Renaissance painter El Greco, specifically his Mannerist style. By implementing El Greco's use of elongated limbs, Picasso transforms a common beggar into something almost saint-like, elevating the less fortunate that one with status would normally walk past to a subject of spiritual reverence. While every other artist was painting sunny picnics, pretty gardens, and vibrant city lights, Picasso was the only one looking at shadows that were cast by using a monochromatic blue palette and elongated figures to evoke empathy for the marginalized underclass of the early 20th century in the European society. By 1901, the Industrial Revolution had created massive wealth in Europe, but also created the forgotten underclass. Picasso used two specific artistic methods to force the audience to look at those people instead of walking past and ignoring. In the real world, poverty is messy, dirty, and bloody. By washing the canvas with shades of blue, Picasso took away all the noise of this world. Blue is associated with cold, night, and depression. By submerging into this color, he created a quiet, somber space where the viewer can't help but feel the stillness and sadness of the subject of the painting. In The Old Guitarist, the limbs are impossibly thin and stretched. This elongation makes you believe that he is fragile and malnourished. Realism can sometimes be cold and disconnected. Picasso uses expressionism to give the painting a soul. The bowed heads and angular joints make the figures look cramped. This visual tightens and triggers an empathetic response in the viewer. We feel the physical discomfort of the person on the canvas. Instead of making the poor look ugly or dirty, the way Picasso paints their elongated limbs gives them a certain grace, which creates a new visual language. He didn't want the viewer to look at the old guitarist and think, I should give him a coin. He wanted the viewer to think, I'm looking at the profound sorrow of a fellow human being. The blue palette and the stretch figures were the tools he used to bridge that gap between the rich and the disregarded subject. In conclusion, Picasso's blue period was far more than a young artist's phrase of personal despair. It was calculated, revolutionary response to a social class divides in the early 20th century. Through my research, specifically based in Merlin McCulley's Picasso, the early years, I discovered that the underworld Picasso documented was not a random collection of subjects. Instead, it was an intentional documentation of the humans left behind by the Industrial Revolution, those whom society chose to ignore as it raced toward the modern world. By combining this historical context with our look at the old guitarist, we can see the true power of his methods. Picasso proved that art didn't have to be pretty to be profound. He bridged the gap between the observer and the disregarded, turning the social outcast into a subject of spiritual reverence and profound human empathy. As we look at these works today, they serve as a reminder that the humanities are not just about the study of beautiful things, but about the study of our shared human dignity in the face of suffering. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our dialogue in the discussion forum.